Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. There's a common phrase in the entrepreneurial world that says, what got you here won't get you there. Actually, I'm sure it's a phrase in the world in general. And what they mean in the entrepreneurial world by that is that the actions that you take to get to one level in your business aren't the same actions you need to take to rise to the next level. And I've found that that's true in academia as well. So today I want to dig into a very specific part of the academic journey. And I want to talk about what got you to tenure won't get you to full. And in the process of talking about this, I'm going to reveal a little project I've been working on. So I am a follower of, or I have been coached by a business coach named Rodgers. And Rodgers has this thing that she calls the entrepreneurial growth scale. What she does is she goes through each level of revenue in a business's growth, and she describes like, what are you worried about at that business level versus what you should be worried about? And then key actions that you should take in order to help you switch levels. Now, my brain is always looking at what business coaches are saying and what other industries are doing and applying it to academia. So I started playing, actually a while ago, I started playing with this idea that is, a version of Rodgers' growth scale, but for academics. Of course, it's different because in academia, part of what moves you from one kind of quote unquote level to the next level is a number of years, right? And then a promotions process in many cases. But I think that the parallel still holds. I think it's still worth thinking about the academic journey as kind of like a growth scale or like a path, a growth path maybe. And I'm not sure what I'm going to call it. I don't want to steal Rachel's growth scale wording. So this, I don't even know what it's going to be called. This is definitely a draft and you're hearing it here first. So maybe this is called an academic journey. I'm not sure because also I want to be clear as I've been before, right? That not all academic journeys look the same, but I do think it's worth looking at similarities across kind of key moments in the career and being able to say okay, here's what you probably are thinking, but here's what you really should be thinking about. So my attempt to do that will start today. And I'm going to start with 3 core levels or stages in the career. And that is the first about 3 years on the tenure track, the second 3 years on the tenure track, and the first few years after getting tenure. So, of course, there's many ways to think about tenure. Not everybody's tenure is the same. Many systems don't use tenure. We'll just say permanency maybe as a replacement for tenure right now, and see if some of this resonates. So for most people, the path to tenure is actually kind of a scramble. All right. It's kind of when you're scrambling to figure it out. You're scrambling to get enough publications done on time. So that's the first thing I'll say about kind of that early career moment is that it might be characterized by feeling like you're trying to get traction, running kind of fast to see if you can make it to the tenure finish line. And okay, so let's get started with years 1 through 3 on the tenure track. I'm going to break this down into kind of what you're thinking in research, teaching, and service, what you're worried about, and then what you should be worried about. So in research, the first 1 to 3 years on the tenure track, you're really trying to make your own path and distinguish yourself as a scholar in your own right. And that's going to look different for different people. So for some people, this first kind of foray out from under the wing of your advisor is going to look like a rebellion, right? You're going to kind of try to distance yourself from the advisor. Sometimes it's more like, how can I build on the work I was doing with my advisor? And this could be your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor. But really that first 1 to 3 years is this like kind of casting out on your own and trying to figure out what quote unquote on your own looks like in your research area. In teaching in this first 1 to 3 years on the tenure track, you're trying to figure out how the heck to handle all these students and all these new preps and a completely new system. Even if you have teaching experience in grad school, it's really quite different once you're on the tenure track. And so you're really just trying to like get traction. You're trying to figure out the system. And many people in that first 1 to 3 years are building syllabi from scratch or adapting existing syllabi, that are outdated or that are just not their style. They're adapting those syllabi to their, way of seeing the world. And so it's a lot of kind of from scratch teaching, creating your lectures from scratch, creating your lesson plans and materials from scratch. And so teaching can, depending on the kind of university you're at, but it really can take up a lot of time because also in that first 1 to 3 years, we are generally less confident than we are as we grow in experience as classroom teachers. So we want to over-prepare. We tend to over-prepare early in the career, and rightfully so, because we are learning and we are figuring out and we are trying to establish authority. You might be attracting a lot of students who want an advisor who's kind of fresh, right? Like someone fresh out of the PhD program or someone fresh to their institution. So you might find that in those years 1 to 3, you're actually attracting a lot of students to you who want you to mentor them or advise them. And you're excited about that. And also, if you don't have a good system for handling it, it's going to become overwhelming in its own way. But you might find you're attracting a lot of graduate students and students in general who want your mentorship in that first 1 to 3 years. In terms of service, although there's this thing out there in the world about protecting junior faculty from too much service, in my experience, this is not the norm. The norm is not actually to protect junior faculty. And in fact, you're exceptionally vulnerable to service in the first 1 to 3 years on the tenure track because you're afraid to say no, because you're afraid of looking unhelpful or uncooperative. So really, you end up kind of doing a lot more service than you probably intend to. And also, depending on your institution, your department might be like actually kind of, again, hungry for new ideas, even though they're stuck in their old ways. They want to get you and your new ideas onto their committees to like change things up or tap your brilliance, right? But at the same time, they're really stuck in their old ways. So do they really want to change things? We don't know. So that's kind of what service might look like in years 1 through 3. Now, what you're probably worried about years 1 through 3 on the tenure track is fitting in, right? You're worried about not making too many waves. You're worried about impressing people. You're worried about looking like you belong, right? Because you want to get tenure. And so you're really looking to fit into your new department. You're also worried about managing the everyday. So as I've said a million times, nobody in grad school teaches you what it's going to be like to actually do your research and teach all these new preps and navigate a new institution and do service. So there's a lot of balls in the air, a lot of things pulling at you. And so managing your everyday work life is very difficult. I mean, it's difficult throughout the career, but it's so new and different than managing your PhD life or your adjuncting life or your postdoc life. It's significantly different enough that it's hard. So you're worried about that, right? Worried about trying to figure out how to manage your time during the week so that you can fit everything in. And you're also worried about, getting by and keeping ahead of things, getting caught up because, you don't want to get behind and you want to do a good job in your new tenure track line. Now, what you should be worried about, though, if I was to take people in their first 1 to 3 years on the tenure track and say, I know you're worried about these things, but I really want you to start thinking about this stuff over here. Here's what it would be. So you should be worried about how to focus your career around a clear mission. A lot of times in that early career, we're just a little bit floundering because, again, we're trying to figure out who we are outside of our advisor or outside of our previous, doctoral studies or postdoc. We're trying to figure out who we are. So the faster you can get to focus in your career, the easier going up for tenure is going to be. So you're worried about catching up. You're worried about what other people are going to think about you. What you really want to be worried about is your academic mission and getting as fast to focus as you possibly can in that early career moment. You also want to worry about how to fund that mission. So again, a lot of times people early career have some advantages. When you come into a position, if you're, fortunate enough to be at an institution that gives you startup funds, you might already have some startup money in order to do preliminary experiments or preliminary studies that you can then leverage into more funding. But we're so in the everyday weeds that a lot of times early career, we're not thinking what's my long-term funding strategy? So that will also be really important early career. You should also be worried about, and this links to the mission thing, you should be worried about how you're going to tell a cohesive story with your career. Now, that's because when you submit your dossier, you need to tell a story that kind of makes sense for why you should be given tenure or why you should be given promotion. Your time at the university needs to kind of tell a tale, right? It needs to tell a story about who you are and where you're going. If you have focus with a clear academic mission statement and a clear direction established early on, it's much easier to tell that story in your dossier. And people don't usually think that far ahead of time because they're too worried about the everyday or they're just worried about the next publication. But you want to start having this bigger thought about the arc of your career even very early on, even if you don't know what it looks like yet, right? But starting to think in that direction. And aligned with that or similar to that, what you should be thinking about is how to align disparate obligations behind your academic mission or in service of your academic mission. So when we first start a new job, we're often taking over this set of courses that the department is desperate to have somebody teach. You may have positioned yourself as somebody who could teach all of those things because you want to get the job. But the farther you go along, sometimes what you agreed to teach at the beginning, what they hired you to teach, doesn't really jive with your research that you're doing. And certainly the service, it's hard to figure out what alignment of service behind your academic mission looks like. So the sooner you can figure out how to line up your teaching, research, and service behind one academic mission, the easier the whole tenure track experience is going to be for you. So that's years 1 through 3 on the tenure track. Let's talk about years 3 through 6. Now, in research in years 3 through 6 on the tenure track, what you're really thinking about is, you're trying to publish enough, quote unquote, enough publications in time to submit your tenure dossier. And when you start to be at year 3, the worry is, do I have enough things in my pipeline that are going to be out in time for me to go up for tenure. If you don't have a book idea or book proposal and you're in a book field and you're in year 3, you're starting to cut it close, right? Especially if your university wants you to have book in hands, like the actual published book by tenure. Many just want to have a contract, but something to think about. So all of a sudden, once you get into years 3, 4, you're like, ooh, tenure's real close. Am I going to make the mark? So in research, you might have been kind of finding your way. And now, instead of thinking about the big picture of your research, what you're thinking about is, do I have enough? Do I have enough publications to go up for tenure? In teaching, what happens is that teaching is pulling at you. Years 3 through 6, teaching starts to feel more like a chore. You keep reinventing the things that you've already created. So maybe you're not teaching new preps anymore, but you're still recreating assignments or recreating lectures or recreating syllabi when maybe your time would be better spent in other pre-tenure pursuits. So maybe your teaching is good enough, but you don't feel like it is. So you keep messing with it and it continues to take a lot of time. Another thing I see with teaching is that people who are not at research 1 or 2 institutions, and so they have a heavy teaching load like a 3-3 or a 4-4 or a 5-5, what they're looking to do is get out of teaching. They've got so much on their plate that they're like, I need to figure out how to teach less. They think that teaching less is the way to go. And so I see this happen over and over again. I did this myself, is that you apply for some little piddly grant or even an internally funded project that's going to give you $3,000 or $5,000 to do some kind of research project and get you a course release. But in the end, that project that you propose and you get the course release for actually takes more time and gets you farther behind than just teaching the dang course. And so sometimes people who have heavy teaching loads and they're trying to get out of some of their teaching so they can focus on research, they end up actually digging themselves into a deeper hole because they are trying to do whatever they can to get a course release. And it doesn't necessarily actually liberate their time in the way that they expect it's going to. And also in years 3 through 6, your grad students, maybe you've collected a lot of grad students who you're now advising, but instead of really being leveraged like a real asset to your research program in years 3 through 6, if you're not careful, you can end up with a lot of graduate students who are sucking your time instead of contributing to your line of research. So that's another thing that you have to be really careful about, especially as you're getting ready to go up for tenure. In terms of service in years 3 through 6 on the tenure track, you are distinguishing yourself as a leader in your department. So people want more from you, even more. But you do not have the time for that, nor do you have the interest in many of the types of leadership that your department and perhaps even your dean is starting to see you as somebody who could take on certain types of leadership. So you have to be really careful about really standing in what you want, because if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a leader and admin can smell leaders a mile away. They want to start to take advantage of that. You might end up with even more service than you originally had, and it's going to bog you down as you try to get your dossier ready. So what you're worried about in years 3 through 6 on the tenure track is tenure. You're worried about tenure, and you have less and less time to actually work on your tenure package and the activities that you need in order to go up for tenure with confidence. The way that you're coping with that is by overworking. I see this all the time in years 3 through 6. You just can't seem to find enough hours in the day, so you extend your days, working in the evenings, waking up early, working on weekends, or you're doing binge working and then crashing on weekends, or binge working and crashing on breaks. So that's how you're coping with this moment in the career. What you should be worried about, instead of worrying about getting tenure. And I know that sounds ridiculous. Like, don't worry about getting tenure because obviously it's very important. But hear me out for a sec, because I think if you do these things, you won't have to worry about getting tenure. You'll just get it. So what you should be worried about is the chain of research that will get your field altering work out into the world. So you should be thinking about this despite tenure, or put tenure aside and really look at the research arc you're on and what you need to do to keep, like this project needs to be done, then this one, so that you can accomplish your research goals. Instead of looking at tenure as a finish line that you're running towards, it's really keeping the focus on your line of work rather than on the promotion moment. And if you can keep that focus, if you can establish that really mission-centered focus at the beginning of your career and then keep it through, then you don't have to worry about getting tenure. You will get tenure. So it's kind of a matter of perception and about like what's important, tenure or this kind of overarching scholarly arc. And so what I'm saying is like, at least like, yes, of course you can still worry about tenure and you're shooting for tenure, and yes, but that also that you're going to be more successful at that if you're paying attention to the scholarly arc, or you're paying attention to the arc of the research journey that you're on. And also related to that, the chain of funding that's going to support you as you pursue that research arc. The other thing you should be worried about is resting and thinking time and culling away the too many things that you have taken on. So what you're worried about is squeezing more hours out of the day. What you should be worried about is how are you going to rest more? How are you going to build space into your schedule so that you can think and have the ideas that are going to propel your career? How can you cull away things that are not aligned? Because the career is like a snowball picking up stuff as it rolls downhill. So you have to be very vigilant about culling away things that maybe you've picked up along the way that are no longer in service of your academic mission. And instead of worrying about saying no so you make people mad in your department, so you're afraid that they won't give you tenure because they'll think you're not a team player, instead you should be worried about clearly communicating your value to your department. So instead of being worried about, doing everything for everybody else or looking selfish, you actually need to be worried about making sure that your message of what you're doing in the department is clear to everyone, so that when you go up for tenure, that the department is behind you because it's clear what you're doing and the contribution that you're making. You need to be able to communicate your value to the department so that they can support your case for tenure. Okay, let's imagine you got tenure and now you are in years 6 to 8 or so, these years immediately post tenure. In research, you're thinking, what now? If you had this attitude of or this thought that I just need to get enough publications for tenure, then you might not have had a clear vision for what the next step is going to be for you, what the next research step is going to be in your trajectory. If you were just head down, I need to have a certain number of pubs, maybe you've lost sight of the big picture. And the big picture is what's going to get you to full. So that's why I've been emphasizing it from the beginning, that this arc of what you're doing, that is the essential thing for you to go to the next level, the full level. So in research, what you're probably thinking post tenure is, what now? I got tenure. What next? In teaching, you're exhausted. You are maybe sick of the classes that you've been teaching. You've maybe outgrown them. Your research line is possibly no longer related to the courses that you're teaching. So you need to line the things back up. You need to figure out what you're going to keep teaching and what you're not to make sure that your teaching stays in line with your research. Your grad students are taking energy, not giving you energy, especially in that immediately post-tenure moment. If you start to feel at sea, then it's hard to guide graduate students in their work because you're kind of lost in your own work. So for service, immediately post tenure, you are trying to protect junior faculty. Like you finally are not junior faculty, and you're probably thinking, I'm not going to be like everybody else. I'm going to do what I wish everybody else had done for me, and I'm going to protect junior faculty. But what you end up doing by doing that is overloading yourself. So you're not sure how to protect junior faculty without overloading yourself. So you end up overloading yourself. And post tenure, the line between service and admin blurs. So again, you've shown yourself to be a leader. And so you are taking on more and more responsibilities. Some of those are service, some of those are admin. And the difference between the two should be that you get paid for admin. Now, it's not always, right? So what ends up happening is that you end up taking on things that you have categorized in your head or that other people have categorized as service. You end up taking them on, but what they really are is admin. What they really are is running the department or running parts of the university or directing a program. And all of those things are actually admin, and you're probably not getting paid for that. So what are you worried about in years 6 through 8 of the tenure track? You're worried about burnout because you're feeling burnout. And you're worried that maybe this is not for me. Maybe if this is what the career is going to be like, maybe it's not the career that I want. You're not even thinking about full because you're so exhausted from getting tenure that you're like, I really don't want to go through that level of exhaustion again. And you don't realize that you don't have to get to full. And so you're worried about that. You're worried about burnout. You're worried about, is this really for me? What you should be worried about at this career stage is actually building a team of support around you to help you achieve your big goals. So instead of your grad students draining energy from you, how can you create a world where your grad students are giving you energy and they're contributing to your line of research and they're a big value add to what you're doing? What you should be worried about at this career stage is legacy. What is your legacy going to be? Because when you figure that out, then you can go up for full. Then you can do the actions that are going to help you easily get full when you're clear what the legacy is. What is the end game of the research arc that you're on? And what is it going to take for you to get there or to bring a team of people there with you? And what you should be thinking about is really stepping into your role as a leader and an expert. You know so much. You are a certified, stamped and sealed expert in your area. It is time for you to act like it, own it, and be the leader that other people already see you being, but we want you to be that leader on your own terms. We want you to decide what leadership looks like for you in line with your values. It doesn't always look like an admin position. It does not have to. But how are you going to lead a team of people towards your goals? Your goals. What is that goal? And how are you going to build a team of support around you to collectively get to that goal? So those are 3 stages in this kind of academic journey scale. I'm not sure what we're calling it, right? I'm still out in the open, There's more stages after this. There's certainly stages before this, but I want to focus on these 3 because I want you to see the difference between the actions that people normally take or usually take, years 1 through 3, years 3 through 6, years 6 through 8, and what you really should be doing. And I want you to notice that the things that you thought were important are not the important things when you get post-tenure. That the big picture is the important thing. That's the thing that's going to get you to full. You can get tenure white knuckling. You can. I watch people do it all the time. You can get tenure on will. You can get tenure on overwork. You can get tenure just head down, bearing it and powering through. I don't want you to get tenure that way. I want you to get it with ease and light and space, but you can get it that way, right? Maybe you have. You can't get full that way. You're not going to get full head down, barreling through. You're not going to get full like people pleasing or worrying about what other people think. You're not going to get full without figuring out the big picture and the big goal, the end game, or the ultimate point of this research that you're doing, of this career that you're building. And I'm saying research, but maybe it's outreach, maybe it's being a public academic, maybe it's teaching, maybe it is service, maybe it's admin. But whatever the container is through which you're going to do the work, you need to see the big picture. So that is the bottom line about what got you to tenure won't get you to full. So I really appreciate you listening to these draft ideas about what happens at different stages in the academic journey and what you're thinking versus what you kind of should be thinking. And again, I don't mean to put a lot of shoulds into your head because I know you have enough there already. But what I am asking you to do is kind of lift your eyes from the weeds to the horizon, because that's the kind of action that is going to help you achieve your goals and help you to create the career that you really want. Before I sign off today, I would be remiss if I didn't point you towards our Elevate info session that is ready for you to go and watch today. We are enrolling now for our Elevate program, which begins in February 2022. We opened enrollment early in October, and the reason that we do it that early is to give you all time to find funding if you're going to ask for institutional funding, gather up your own resources if you're going to fund yourself, and really think about, have time to mull over and decide whether Elevate is the support you need to make that eyes to the horizon career move that I'm talking about in this podcast. Elevate is our 6-month coaching program, which relies heavily on one-on-one coaching, but in addition, live workshops and group coaching calls. So it's our program for mid-career women and non-binary people, post-tenure if you are in a tenure system, and if you're not in a system that uses the word tenure, we might say mid-career. Elevate is an application-only program, but what we invite you to do before you apply is go get all the information, hear all the logistical details of the program, and you can do that by going and watching our recorded information session at the link that's in the show notes. So if you were inspired by this podcast, then I encourage you to go watch the Elevate info session, decide whether it is the program for you, and send us an application. Who knows, you might be part of the 24 people that we are selecting for our February 2022 Elevate program. I'm so honored that you spent your valuable time listening to this episode. Thank you. Before I go, I want to ask you, do you have an almost done article languishing in a virtual drawer? How about a new writing project that you just haven't been able to make the time to start yet? How about a piece of writing in the messy middle that you need to revive? Well, I've got the solution for you. Writing Sprint Blueprint. The Writing Sprint Blueprint is a powerful productivity tool for overwhelmed academics who want to get stalled out publications out of their pipelines and into the world. And it's only $27. And when you grab Writing Sprint Blueprint, you'll get my private motivational podcast feed called Stick to the Plan. It's 10 mini episodes of around a minute each that you can listen to right from your favorite podcast app to motivate you during your writing sprint. So what are you waiting for? Follow the link in the show notes to get Writing Sprint Blueprint today. I'll see you inside.